What's up, guys? We're moving on to lesson 4 in this PowerPoint tutorial, looking at exchange of nutrients. So we're going to be taking a look at the digestive system today and some of the processes that take place. Get excited. So exchange of nutrients, and you're looking at Pearson section 5.2 from page 172. By the end of the lesson, you need to be able to do two things. Now, you'll note that there's no particular dot point that's talking about knowing the different structures of the digestive system. However, these dot points, to understand these well, you need to know the digestive system. So first, you need to be able to identify the characteristics of absorptive surfaces in the digestive system. So primarily, that's looking at the villi within the small intestine. And we're going to talk about the structure of those tissues as well as the functions that they need to perform. The second one is you need to describe the role of digestive enzymes. So that's things like amylase, protease, and lipase in chemical digestion. Remember that anytime you hear an ase at the end of the word, that typically indicates that we're talking about an enzyme. And we've talked about enzymes in topic 1. So we're going to go into that a little bit more, looking at digestive enzymes. All right, so digestion, you've learnt about the digestive system for many years now, and we know that digestion is the breakdown of food into forms that can be used by an organism. So for us as humans, that's breaking down food into smaller parts until we eventually have that down to such a level that we can absorb nutrients that are important for the body. When we talk about digestion, that can include both physical and chemical breakdown. Physical breakdown is also called mechanical digestion, and that's referring to breakdown by the teeth in the mouth, grinding in the gizzards, or like churning in the stomach. So an actual physical, mechanical breakdown of the food object. Chemical breakdown is what mostly occurs in our digestive tract, and that involves the use of digestive enzymes, chemicals that are going to speed up the process of breaking something down. And there's enzymes that do this, and we're going to talk about bile as well, which is a product produced in the liver. Now, over to the right there, you can see a comparison of different teeth structures in different organisms. So often the structure of the tooth indicates a little bit about the diet of the animal. A good example of that here is with C. This is looking at something like what a cow would have. Big, solid teeth, and they grind back and forth. That's to do with munching up plant matter like grass and things like that. A structure like B is more looking at animals that are shearing something. So even similar with these sort of canine structures in A, they're probably going to be pulling apart meat and things like that. So the teeth is the first point of physical breakdown, and the shape of the teeth and the movement of the teeth is going to be assisting in the physical breakdown of that particular animal's diet. Okay, so just taking a look at the structure of the digestive system, this should be fairly familiar to you. The digestive system is basically a tube that leads from the mouth to the anus, and we call it the digestive tract. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as the alimentary canal. So the organs of the digestive system include the mouth. We're going to go through each of these, but the mouth is where we're going to get majority of our physical, mechanical digestion, as well as some chemical digestion. We're going to talk a little bit about the salivary glands. The esophagus is a important part of the digestive system, carrying our food from the mouth into the stomach. The stomach is a huge part of chemical digestion as well as physical digestion, and we'll look at some of the structures within the stomach that allow that. We've also got the pancreas. Now, we don't often think of the pancreas as a digestive organ as such, but it is an excretory gland, and its role is really important in excreting hormones and enzymes that assist in digestion. The liver and gallbladder, again, they have multiple roles in the body, but they're still quite involved in digestion because of the bile that is produced by the liver and excreted by the gallbladder. We then have the large and small intestines. So the small intestine is the narrower one. Even though it's longer in distance, it's thinner, and it's all curled up on the inside here. and then the large intestine surrounding that. And then lastly, we've got the rectum, which is where the final stages occur, and then excretion occurring at the anus. So before we delve any further into the digestive system, let's have a look at these digestive enzymes. Now, this figure on the left should be fairly familiar to you because we've talked about enzymes quite recently. Remember, with an enzyme, they have a specific active site and they're going to bind a particular substrate. And in the digestive system, the substrate is going to be the food particle. So it could be sugars, it could be proteins, it could be fats. Now, when they join, we get our enzyme substrate complex. And remember that enzymes are involved in either building up molecules or breaking them down. And within the digestive tract, they're going to be breaking down those food particles into smaller units. So that's where we're going to get our nutrients. We might get simple sugars from larger, more complex sugars. And we'll talk about some of the different enzymes and what they do. So these are part of our chemical digestion. These enzymes are really important because digestion wouldn't be able to occur effectively without these enzymes. It's also important that they don't overproduce because sometimes you might get too much of, for example, hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And that can lead to things like indigestion, heartburn, and stuff like that. So our three main types of digestive enzymes, which I'm going to point out through the PowerPoint, are the amylases, the proteases, and the lipases. Amylase acts on sugar units. So regardless of the size of the carbohydrate, amylases act to break them down into smaller sugar units. And remember, our body tries to break things down into glucose because that's what can be taken up and readily used by the cells. Proteases break down proteins into amino acids, which are essential for the body. And lipases act on lipids or fats to break down into fatty acids and glycerol, which are useful for the body in maintaining our cell membranes and organ protection. Now, this is a diagram out of your textbook, Pearson, figure 5.3.3, and it's just showing you the mode of action of these enzymes. At the top, you can see amylase, and this is the one that acts on carbohydrates. Now, starch is a really long chain of sugar units in a big, long structure, and that's what we find in things like potatoes. Amylase would act on starch to bind to it and break it down into maltose, which is still larger sugar units, but much simpler, just 2 carbon ring structures. And then that maltose could be further broken down further along the digestive tract. Here's our protease. And proteins are, we often see them in a big globular structure, but if we unfold it, we're going to get sort of lots of different building blocks here that are amino acids. When the protease binds to the protein, it breaks it down into smaller protein units called peptides, and then another enzyme, peptidase, further breaks that down into amino acids. So see, at the start we had this big chain of amino acids linked together chemically. At the end we have individual singular amino acids, and they can then be used by the body. Lastly, we've got the lipases here. And remember our phospholipids from when we were doing the phospholipid bilayer. Our lipase enzymes are going to bind to lipids, so that's our fats, oils, and it's going to break them down into fatty acids and glycerol, and they're able to be used by the body. Okay, so going through the digestive system and starting at the mouth, I mentioned that we've got the teeth and the salivary glands, which are really important. The teeth we spoke about earlier, looking at the different types of teeth for the mechanical breakdown of food. The teeth are really indicative of the diet because they're going to be either ripping apart meat or grinding away at grass products if we're a cow, etc. The salivary glands are located in the mouth here, and they're responsible for secreting digestive enzymes such as amylase, which we find in the mouth for the chemical breakdown. So we've got the physical happening with the teeth and the chemical happening in the salivary glands, releasing enzymes into the mouth. Now you can try this at home if you feel like it, but if you place a piece of bread on your mouth and let it sit there for quite some time and the salivary glands start to act upon it, you'll find that the bread actually begins breaking down before you even chew on it or have it enter your digestive tract, because the salivary amylase is already starting to act on the bread, and it's going to start breaking down the carbohydrates in the bread. Kind of gross, but you might want to try it. Okay, this is the esophagus, and the esophagus is about 25 centimeters, like a big hose leading from your mouth down the back of your throat into your stomach. Its job is to perform what we call peristalsis, which is this squeezing rhythmic contraction movement that squeezes your food down from your mouth into your stomach. It's really muscular, so it can actually do this even if you do a handstand. You can eat the food and your esophagus will contract and push that food down to the stomach, whether you're upright or upside down. It also has mucus glands in it, and that helps to lubricate the food as it moves down into the stomach, and it makes it much more pleasant for the food to pass down, and rather than getting caught up by the friction on your esophagus. All right, now we're getting to the interesting stuff here with the stomach. So the structure of the stomach is quite interesting because it actually has 3 different layers of muscle, and the muscle runs in different directions. So you can see in this figure here, you've got longitudinal muscle, which is running long ways up the organ. You've got circular muscle, which runs around the organ this way. And then you've got oblique muscle, which kind of runs diagonally across the muscle. So if you imagine these 3 layers, they're really important in the mechanical breakdown of food. Those muscle walls are going to contract and relax to mechanically churn and break down that food. The other important thing is you've got these folds in here, and they're folded like that so that the stomach is able to extend and retract based on whether you're full or not. Another really important point is our chemical digestion that happens here. We've got gastric juices, we've got protease as part of our gastric juices, and we call the specific protease enzyme pepsin, and its job is to digest those proteins into the amino acids. The stomach also has a really strong acid called hydrochloric acid. It's very, very strong, and it kills any bacteria that's in our food before entering the digestive system. Hydrochloric acid is obviously acidic, so it's got a low pH, and it's going to cause some problems if we don't neutralize that throughout the process of the digestive tract. We'll get to that as we move on. If we take a little piece out of the muscle wall and zoom into it, you see these really cool folded structures called mucosa. And if we take another piece out of that and look more closely, we have these structures here called gastric pits, and they contain gastric glands, which are secreting our gastric juices. We've also got mucus cells, which secrete mucus to protect the stomach from its own acids. So it actually stops it from self-digesting. And often the reason why we get terrible heartburn feeling if we vomit or something like that is because those strong acids from the stomach have made their way up into the esophagus, which doesn't have as much of a protective lining as what our stomach does. The other interesting things are these sphincters here, which are little like open and close valves. And that's going to open and let the stomach contents flow into the beginning of the small intestine, which we call the duodenum. That's useful because we don't just want undigested food flowing down into the small intestine before our stomach has done all of what it needs to do. So the sphincters allow parts of, I guess, the digested food material to be segregated to particular organs. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the pancreas. And like I said earlier, the pancreas is a secretory structure. So it's like a gland, and it's got lots of ducts in it that drain into the small intestine. So it kind of sits, our stomach would be like up here, and then we've got the pancreas underneath, which filters into the small intestine. The pancreas's job is all around chemical digestion. The pancreas itself isn't doing the digesting. It's secreting the chemicals into the small intestine to do the chemical digesting. So it has pancreatic amylase, it has protease, and it has lipase. So lots of our key digestive enzymes are happening in that pancreas. It also regulates blood sugar through the secretion of hormones like glucagon and insulin. Insulin gets released when we have our lunch. So we eat lots of lunch that contains sugars. And when our sugar levels rise, insulin gets released to lower that blood sugar. And it does that by storing our sugars in the body for use later. Glucagon works the opposite. And I remember learning at uni, glucose all gone, glucagon. So that happens if we are running out of sugar and we need energy. Glucagon gets released from the pancreas and it goes and breaks down sugar that has been stored in our body for us to use. Now onto the small intestine. We spoke about the duodenum before, which is the very starting part of our small intestine leading off the stomach. That leads into the next bit called the jejunum, and then we've got the ileum, which is the final part of the small intestine. The small intestine has a massive surface area because of all of the microscopic little projections called villi, which we'll have a look at soon. And there's over 6 meters of basically like a big hose packed in and coiled into your belly. The function of the small intestine is a lot of chemical digestion and the bulk of our nutrient absorption. It has amylase, protease, and lipase, which have been secreted from the pancreas. The other important secretion from the pancreas is sodium bicarbonate, which is basically bicarb soda. And the importance of that is it needs to neutralize that really highly acidic stomach acid, that hydrochloric acid that was just secreted by the stomach. The intestines aren't built for this highly acidic environment. So it's really important that the pancreas secretes sodium bicarbonate because it's highly alkaline to neutralize that acid before entering the rest of the digestive tract. Now, absorption of all of our key nutrients happens here. The amylase, protease, and lipase from throughout the process have done their jobs. And now the important things like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, all those nutrients can now be reabsorbed back into the body. Anything that's not useful then proceeds on to the large intestine to be excreted. Now, before we move on to the large intestine, this is having a look at that villi. And this is one of the important learning goals of today, to have a look at that structure. Here's our small intestine. If we take a section of the wall of our small intestine, we zoom on in, and you can see that it is not a smooth hose-like structure. It's actually got these little hair-like projections. Now, you would have remembered from lesson 2 these epithelial cells, and they contain microvilli on the top, little hair-like projections. If we look more closely at that, you can see that it's much like what we looked at with our respiratory structures, where you have a network of capillaries and blood supply. And looking more closely at that, we are able to go in closer, and as these nutrients are beginning their absorption, they're able to absorb straight across that single layer of epithelium into our blood supply. And that's how our nutrients get into our blood supply before we excrete out the waste products. It's really well suited for the small intestine because having these villi and microvilli means that we get bulk increase of surface area and as much maximal absorption as possible. Now that we've absorbed all of our important materials back into the body, the large intestine's job is to get rid of any water back into the body to produce a nice solid particle known as feces. If this doesn't work effectively and the water doesn't reabsorb very well, that's when we get a phenomenon known as diarrhea. No one likes it, it's not great, and it's when our large intestine has failed us. The normal process that would happen is that water gets reabsorbed back into the body. You'll notice that the surface area is much smaller. It's a 1.5 meter tubular structure, and its sole job is just to soak up water back into the body before excretion takes place. There's a few different parts to it, and They lead on to the rectum, which is going to store the waste product, and then that gets excreted from the anus. So to summarize those processes, I've made this little table for you, and you'll find something similar in your textbook. But what I've done is just highlighted the digestive enzymes and important secretions that take place along the way. So it's good to have a look at those, and your work that you're going to do for this task is centered around our digestive enzymes, the different parts of the digestive system, and those villi and microvilli of the small intestine. So hopefully you are able to identify the characteristics of those absorptive surfaces in the digestive system, namely the structure and function of the villi, and describe the role of digestive enzymes such as amylase, protease, and lipase in chemical digestion. Get moving onto your task for this lesson, and I look forward to reading your work.